For joining us today. We are again here in the library on a Saturday morning and talking about Disney princess films. I know that some of you went online to participate in our public forum and vote. And so by request of the audience, today we will be talking about two Disney princess films that the majority of the voters, the majority of you viewers want to know more about. And the first one is Disney's Mulan. The second is Frozen. Two pretty different, I think, princess films, separated by 15 years actually, Yes, 15 years. So there are some similarities that we can see. There are also some differences, and today we will talk about these two films because a lot of people like Mulan. So we will talk a lot more about Mulan, and then Frozen, the last part. But we can draw upon some important things, important lessons through these films. Some of you who are watching this, either now, live, or in the future, you might be curious about what do I mean when I say Disney princess. And so you can watch our previous video where I give a more detailed introduction. But you can also listen now, and I will give a very brief introduction. And today I want to start with a very basic question, a very easy question, but very important. And that is, how is a princess supposed to look and act? And how is she supposed to want? And of course, this includes what does she supposed to want? What I mean, how does she supposed to want? I mean, how does she fulfill her ambition? How does she go about getting what she wants? Does she wait for it to happen? Or does she actively go out and seek what she wants? And what motivates her? These are important things to ask when we are analyzing characters, and particularly analyzing female characters in the Disney princess films. So very quick introduction. So those of you who have already seen this before, let's do a little bit of a review. The Disney princess tradition starts from Snow White in 1937, 80 years ago. And Snow White is depicted as a European, young, naive, innocent girl who is easily tempted, a good housewife. And she gets poisoned, and she waits for her prince, and the prince ultimately is able to save her through true love's kiss. There's also the very famous image of the poison apple, which represents temptation. And therefore, we can, I think, quite confidently say that this first Disney princess sets a tradition that warns girls not to be too active. It warns girls to be at home, to be reserved, to be conservative. And it also tells a girl that what she wants, what you should want, is your Prince Charming, your white knight, or your prince, right? To give you true love's kiss and save you from eternal sleep, or something like that. Okay, and of course, every Disney princess has her famous song, or I Want song. Okay, Snow White sings, "Someday my prince will come." We fast forward 13 years later to Cinderella, 1950. Cinderella is a princess who has a lot of grief in her life, and we see this in the way the story is portrayed. Okay, she interacts with animals, she has magic, a fairy godmother to help her. But the shifted focus here is a shift toward personal grief. Cinderella is someone who has a lot of pain in her heart, but is able to overcome them and be strong, have courage, and be kind enough to attract a prince. through luck. The shift here is more psychological, I think, but still very conventional. Cinderella is still presented as a girl who does a lot of housework. And then we get to Sleeping Beauty in 1959. Both Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty are post-Second World War. So there is a rebuilding of the world. And here, I think that this theme of hope in the future in these films. Sleeping Beauty is better a little bit, I think, because the prince has to slay a dragon and not just show up. But these three films, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and Snow White, are normally considered first-generation Disney princess. They are first generation because they are conventional, they are based on fairy tales, and also because they represent very traditional, I think, female roles. Very traditional, not so conventional, not so modern views of how a girl should act, look also, and what she should want, how she should want. And fast forward, there's a period here with no Disney films, but then we get to this famous Little Mermaid. Last time, when I was talking about the tradition, I didn't mention this because we didn't have time, but there is a famous statue in Denmark of Little Mermaid. And she is depicted as gazing back into the sea. And so the story of Little Mermaid is significantly shifted in Disney's rewriting. She wants to be on land and marry a prince, and ultimately she succeeds. This is a comedy, whereas in the original, it's a tragedy. 1989 marks important feminist works, and of course important feminist movements. So by this time, Ariel is considered very modern. And so her famous I Want song is part of that world, where she sings that bright young women, sick of swimming, ready to stand. And so there's this very iconic moment, very touching moment where she stands up, quite literally, where she grows legs. And so this is already a new generation. Last time our focus was on this film and the live-action remake, Beauty and the Beast. I won't say too much about it, only to say that Belle is considered a modern princess. She is eccentric, and she's very comfortable being eccentric, and she is able to save her prince and see the beauty within a beast, and ultimately save him and his castle and servants. It's a beautiful story I like very much. But this is 1991, we're almost at Mulan. Aladdin starts a tradition of, for want of a better word, collecting princesses of different races. There is a problem, I think, in this, and which we will talk about later in Mulan, where Disney princesses used to all be white, but then you start expanding and you start building a repertoire of princesses, and they can all be included in this Disney tradition, and therefore young girls all over the world can find a princess that looks like them. And I believe this is why Mulan is considered a Disney princess, because there is a huge Asian community, or Asian American, ethnic Asian community, particularly ethnic Chinese community, that wants to identify with the Disney princess. So Princess Jasmine is a fierce character who ultimately she can choose her own fate. She chooses to marry a street rat. Pocahontas gets to prevent a war from happening, fall in love with her colonizer, a romanticized version of Native Americans and their lives. Many problems with this story because it is, of course, based on a real person. And the story is romanticized in a way that's not very comfortable for many people. And we'll talk about this in our actual workshops. But Pocahontas, I want to say very quickly, is she represents this sort of exotic girl more strongly than Aladdin does, and more strongly than Mulan does. And so I think when we get to our film today, Mulan, she is not ethnically presented or culturally, she isn't surrounded in an environment, I think, that she's not romanticized. Yeah, let's put it that way. Her culture is not as romanticized as Pocahontas, Pocahontas is. Okay, so here we are at Mulan, and I'd like to ask if you are in the audience or here, and you can ask a question about Mulan now, which I will think about, and we can contribute to our discussion. So, does anyone want to ask a question or share an impression if they when they watch the film? It's almost, believe it or not, 20 years old. Does it feel like it's 20 years old? Mulan, to me, it doesn't. It feels actually very close. You see it very often, but it's almost 20, believe it or not. Have you all seen it before? Film Mulan? Yes? Yes. And I think it's a film that is quite exciting. I like quite a bit, but there are also some problems that we should talk about. According to the tradition, there is also a break here of about 10 years, more than a decade, and we get to Princess and the Frog. This is probably the least well-known Disney princess films, and part of the reason is because Tiana, this princess, is presented as African American from New Orleans. She's presented as black, and maybe that contributed. There's still racism in our society, but also because at this time, 2009, animation has gotten so good that presenting this traditional form in 2D is not so exciting. Okay, this is already the time where we have films like Toy Story and many of the Pixar classics that we know and love. And so in some ways it doesn't look as interesting. According to some critics, it's played a role in why this film was not so successful. And so there's a shift here. The Princess and the Frog is a transition back into more conventional Disney princess films, but also higher animation. There's a swift shift here to films like this, Tangled, which is also based on a fairy tale. And the animation is more advanced, obviously, when you watch the film. And we enter into the second decade of the 21st century. We have characters princesses who talk fast, move fast, a lot of animation, and also a lot of character that is quite 21st century. Rapunzel and of course Anna talks like an American girl or American young teenage girl, and their movements, their language, their body language, all reflect this. Okay. There's a film that a lot of people don't know is a Disney princess film. This is Disney and Pixar's Brave, and Merida is considered Scottish. She is the youngest, I believe, of the Disney princesses for the majority of the story, for the major parts of the plot. And she's portrayed as having problems with her mother. And this is a very important theme in this film. According to the poll, this is not a very interesting film. Not many people voted for it, but I think it's wonderful. If you've never seen it, I really encourage watching Brave. The animation is beautiful, and the storyline is very touching, because I think mother-daughter relationships aren't mentioned often enough in animation and film. For the majority of the Disney princess films, the mother characters are either dead or evil, which is not so great. But here we have a real mother-daughter relationship. Okay, today we'll talk about Frozen, where we have sister princesses, the only Disney princess film that has two princesses. And I think it's a very good theme to think about, because many of us have sisters. I'd say the majority of us would either have one or would want to have one. I think sisters are wonderful, annoying at times for their honesty and for their anyway. Brothers have to put up with some things, sometimes the truth. But today we'll talk about the relationship between the two and how Frozen reanalyzes, revamps certain conventions of the Disney princess tradition. There are a few remakes that we should talk about. Maleficent is one, revising Sleeping Beauty. Cinderella, a live-action remake of the original 1950s film. And now we get to Moana, last year, a tribal princess who doesn't have a love interest, like Elsa. Shouldn't give this away, but if you haven't seen it, go see it. It's very good. And then Beauty and the Beast, 2017, the most recent live-action remake, and in which Belle is very modern, played by Emma Watson, is considered to be very advanced for her time. And so we've moved into an age now, I think, that Disney princesses have to be very active, not like Snow White or Cinderella. They have to actively fight for what they want. They can act in more modern ways, in more boyish ways, for lack of a better word. And they can also want things that are not just relationships. They can have ambition. Certainly, Mulan seems to display this kind of ambition, although we're not sure. So today we'll be talking about these two films, Mulan and Frozen. Now, if we compare the two, they're separated by 15 years. There's a lot of emphasis in both films about not wanting a relationship. And so Mulan doesn't actually fall in love in the film. Neither does Elsa. There is no love connection for Elsa, which is actually a very interesting choice. And both of these films talk about being unconventional. What happens when you are different from everyone else? Sometimes you have some problems. And how do you face those problems? The solution is actually quite different, as we will see. Mulan, who sings the famous Reflection, has to be true to herself, but by helping her family, her father. Whereas Elsa is famous for singing Let It Go, right? Letting go of her boundaries and showing her true nature. But ultimately, she has to be saved and recognized by her sister, Anna. And so there are different elements here for us to talk about. But I think the major thing we should remember as well, another thing we should remember, is that Mulan and Frozen are both based on old literary works. And we all, as students of Mandarin Chinese and Chinese literature, Mulan is based on an old poem, 木兰诗, 木兰辞. And Frozen is based on an Andersen fairy tale called The Snow Queen. And how Disney revises these stories, how they present their characters, how they revise the plot, is very important for us to think about. And of course, there's wonderful music in both films, which we will talk about in detail. You all must be very curious why I've put an image. This is not a mistake. This is a famous American TV drama series, Sex and the City. And how many of you here in the audience have watched Sex and the City? Okay. What's your name?
Yolanda.
I'm sorry?
Yolanda.
Yolanda. Yolanda, you've watched Sex and the City before. Do you know, first of all, when did it start? When was the first season of Sex and the City?
I know it's low, but I'm not sure.
You know that it's old, right? How old? Is it as old as Snow White?
No.
No, it's not, right? But is it older than, say, Mulan?
Yes.
It's older than Mulan?
I guess.
You guess so. Is it older than Beauty and the Beast, 1991, Beauty and the Beast, and Ariel, 1989,
Maybe
Little Mermaid?
around that time.
Maybe around that time. Okay, so different generation now, I think. Sex and the City came out the same year as Mulan, 1998. And what is Sex and the City about? It's very clear, right? It's about sex and the city. We have four women, four modern American women living in New York City, right? The heart of, some would say the heart of American culture, right? American modern culture, driving forces of American fashion industry, a very important place and a place of opportunity. And of course, it's about sex. When it came out, it was a revolution. Of course, by now we have dramas like Game of Thrones, right, which is a lot more explicit and a lot more violent. I think our tastes have changed, or at least the standards of what can be shown on TV have changed. But I remember when Sex and the City came out, it was really, really revolutionary. It was a landmark in TV history. And the reason for this is because of its content, of how they talked openly about their relationships. They talked openly about their desires, right, and their experiences. And also, I think it portrays a very important thing, which is it portrays four friends, four women friends, who, if you've watched, right, Ilana, you know, they're completely different, right? These four women are completely different in terms of their beliefs in life, their occupation, right, their goals, and of course the way they approach relationships is completely different. However, the four of them are friends, they get together, they solve their problems, and no matter what kind of relationships happen in their lives, these four women stay together through many problems. And I think it's a very good message that sisters, even if you adopted, right, not literal sisters, but having female friends, if you're a girl, is very important. In the next session, I'll begin by talking about this image. This is a scene that I really like from the film version, the first film of Sex and the City. Okay? And if any of you have watched this before, you can answer, tell me what this is about. Who is this character? Who is she? And who is this character here? And what is happening in this scene? It relates to Mulan, I think, and the Disney princess tradition in a very powerful way. And we'll talk about it in a few minutes. Let's take a short break. Thank you all very much.